Good morning. This is the Sunday sermon for Sunday, August 8th. And of course, we do encourage you to come for in-person worship at the church at 10 o'clock. But if you're not able to, we do provide this, a little bit briefer sermon than you will receive at church, and then also a 15-minute Sunday devotion for you. It's a separate video. If you're not able to come to church, but we do hope to see you at church. So anyway, today what we're looking at for our message is 1 Kings chapter 19. And so this is about, this is a famous passage in the Old Testament about the prophet Elijah. And so let's take a look at it. And I'm going to read a little bit more than just simply what the lectionary for this week is. I'm going to include a little bit after that. So it starts at 1 Kings 19, verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets of Baal with the sword. Now you remember, Ahab and Jezebel are the two most notorious people in many ways in the Bible. Ahab is considered to be the most evil, worst king, and he is the most evil, worst king partly because of his evil wife, who is Jezebel. Jezebel is the daughter of a pagan priest who isn't from Israel, but rather from the coastal area a little bit further north. And so she is thoroughly pagan, and she has introduced all kinds of pagan worship and really pushed that and has really opposed the worship of God. And so she has led her husband astray and the whole nation. And so anyway, Ahab, her husband, the king of Israel, has told Jezebel, the queen, that Elijah the prophet has killed all of her prophets, the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and killed them with the sword. And that was on Mount Carmel when God brought fire down from the sky. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, "May the gods deal with me ever so severely if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." In other words, if I do not kill you. Now, isn't it interesting here? The Bible then says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. One of the great things about the Bible is that it doesn't sugarcoat things. It's not revisionist. Elijah is the greatest prophet in all of history, probably, or at least he and Moses are the two greatest. It's debatable in some ways which is the greater of the two, but he's at least one of the two greatest prophets in the Old Testament. And yet, even after all that he's done, even after the power encounter on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, the 450 prophets of Baal and Asherah, even after that, then when he hears that Jezebel is out for his blood, he's afraid. He's afraid, and he runs for his life. And he runs a long way. He runs clear out of the country is what he does. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah. Now see, they're in the northern kingdom of Israel. They're up here by Mount Carmel, which isn't that far from, Jesus' home, Nazareth, and Megiddo, and all of that area. And so Elijah has come from the northern kingdom up in Galilee, basically, and has gone clear to southern Judah, clear down to the desert, the wilderness, to Beersheba in Judah. And there he left his servant, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So he goes even further. He goes further into the wilderness, further into the desert. And he goes a full day's journey, and then he comes to a broom tree. Now, a broom tree is a shrub. You don't have much growing, for instance, in the Sinai desert, in the true wilderness. There's not much of anything that grows. But one of the things that you will find in some places is a broom tree, which is a shrub. So you can get underneath, you can shinny yourself underneath it, and you can get some shade from the hot, hot beating sun. And so that's what Elijah does after this long journey. He sits down after he's run away. He's run away several hundred miles, probably, it looks like. and he sits down underneath the broom tree and he prays that he might die. Isn't it ironic? He runs because he's afraid of Jezebel, but he's so discouraged, and he prays to God that he would die. He says, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. I'm no better than the people who fell away from you. I'm no better than the people who rebelled against you in the wilderness. I'm no better than any of these people. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals. And one of the interesting things is the broom tree is a good source of firewood in the wilderness. And so they would take the limbs of the broom tree and they would make them into coals, and you could do a lot of stuff with the coals. So the angel has baked him some bread over hot coals and given him a jar of water. And he ate and he drank, and then he lay down again. So see, God provides. God provides in the wilderness. Once again, God provides. God always provides. He provides for us. We despair of life. We despair of the state of things in the world. We despair of our problems. Say, oh God, I'm ready to die. Just take me. But here Elijah, he is there, and the angel of God has come to him and given him some food and given him some water. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. and I have to wonder, is the journey he's talking about this long trip he's taken by foot, or is it maybe just the journey of life, Elijah's life? He's weary from the journey. He's weary of having to deal with Ahab and Jezebel. He's weary of dealing with Israel. He's weary of dealing with faithless people. He's weary of being under pressure and persecution all the time. He's just weary after all of this. So anyway, Elijah gets up and he eats and he drinks a second time. Strengthened by that food, he then travels for 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Mount Horeb, that is Mount Sinai. That's another word, another name for Mount Sinai, which is the mountain of God. It's where Moses received the Ten Commandments. It's where Moses met with God. Remember, it's where the people of Israel, the Hebrews, met with God, and where the covenant was struck, where they made the covenant, where God made the covenant with Israel. That he would be their God and they would be his people. And so he goes for 40 days. Looks like he goes for 40 days without eating or drinking. That should call to mind something, doesn't it? It should remind you of Jesus after he's baptized by John the Baptist, who has the spirit of the prophet Elijah upon him, in a sense. That's what it says in the Bible. That he is the Elijah who must come. He is like Elijah in spirit. And after Jesus is baptized, before he begins his earthly ministry, he goes out into the wilderness and he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And he's out in the wilderness. And the question I think we should ask is this a similar journey? When Jesus was in the wilderness, where did he go? Now, it's always assumed that he just wandered around the Dead Sea, or maybe he went across the Jordan to the far side in the wilderness, but he was out there for 40 days, and Jesus easily, and I would suggest to you probably, went to Mount Sinai, went to Mount Horeb as well during his 40 days of fasting, okay? And so Elijah has come to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There Elijah entered a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him, saying, what are you doing here, Elijah? That's a good question, isn't it? Of course, he's discouraged. But the thing is, think about it. The word of the Lord has come to Elijah all the time. He didn't have to be down at Mount Sinai. He didn't have to be some special place for the word of the Lord to come to him, for God to speak to him, for God to use him, did he? He saw God rain down fire from the sky on Mount Carmel, hundreds of miles away in northern Israel. So what are you doing here, Elijah, God asks. And Elijah says, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. But the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I am the only one left, and they are seeking my life as well. And so, Elijah's there just saying to God, I think, well, the covenant didn't take, the covenant didn't work. I'm the last one left. I thought I'd just come back and finish up, cross all the T's and dot all the I's. I'm the last one left. Sorry, God, covenant's over. Then the Lord said to him, go back by the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you arrive, you are to anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You are also to anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Menorah, to succeed you as prophet. It's ironic. God sends him right back, even beyond where he had come from. He sends him to Aram, to the kingdom of Aram. He sends him to Damascus. Do you realize Damascus is farther away, farther north than where Elijah fled? You realize that Elijah's got to walk 600 miles north? That's what God sends him to do, to go anoint. But isn't it interesting? He thinks that all is lost, everything's over, and God sends him to do what? To anoint 2 kings and a prophet to succeed him. His work isn't quite done. He's still got the business to anoint kings. He's still got important business to do. God sends him right back, puts him right back on the same path that he had been on before. It's not it's not the end. And God says, of course, at the end, I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, the idol, and whose mouths have not kissed him. So Elijah thinks he's the last one left, but God has reserved for himself 7,000 who also are faithful, who also are maintaining the covenant, who also are still standing for God. And isn't that the lesson for us? The lesson for us is no matter what it looks like, whether out in the world or in our own lives, God is still with us. We can despair of life. We can become discouraged and give up. We think, oh, what is there left to do? What is there left to say? Oh, all is lost. But all isn't lost. There's so many problems in the world. That's because we live in a fallen, sinful world. And it's always been like this. And it's always going to be like this until the end, until Jesus comes back the second time, until he returns, and it's the end of the age, and death and sin and evil is done away with. Until that happens, until the final judgment happens, that's the state of the world. It's a mess. It's always been a mess. It's a mess now. It always will be a mess until Jesus comes back. But God knows what's going on. He's got his plan of salvation. It's being worked out. And in spite of all the mess, in spite of even the unfaithfulness of the Hebrews, the unfaithfulness of the Israelites, the unfaithfulness of Christians, of the Christian church, in spite of these things, even though we are sinners, God knows what he's doing. And God miraculously provides us what we need when we need it. Just as he gave Elijah food when he needed it on more than one occasion. God provides him what he needs. He gives him his marching orders. He tells him what he must do. And it's the same with us. Let us not despair or become overly discouraged. Nothing's different than it's always been. You may think it's worse out there. Yeah, you can look out there and maybe America is worse, for instance, than it was a few years ago. Maybe it is. But if it is, so what? We live in a sinful world, and we always have, and God is in control. So we don't need to worry about it. All we need to do is to receive our marching orders and do what God has said before us, just like happened with Elijah. God reminded him what he was supposed to do, sent him off, told him to go back and do what he was supposed to. And in spite of all of his failings, in spite of all of his sins, in spite of his discouragement, Elijah is the greatest prophet in the Old Testament. You and I, too, even though we're sinners, even though we have many faults and problems and we've done many things wrong, God can use you and me too. God sustains you and me. Let us just be like Elijah. Take our marching orders. Go back and go the way we came and fulfill what God has set before us. Amen.